What is up, guys? So AMC Plus has given us a Halloween treat and has released episode 2 of Interview the Vampire a week ahead of when it will air on AMC. So with that said, I got to watch it. So what did I think? So the episode opens up to something that would excite all of the fans and readers of Anne Rice that know the novels. Daniel is looking at a certain painting on the wall, and he is just captivated by the painting. And then he looks down and he sees the artist who drew the painting, who painted it, and he goes, Marius. And he says, I don't know who that is. And then us, that's nothing at the average viewer, but us, just like seeing red, you're like, whoa, that's a little fan nod right there. And I hope to see that Marius comes later somewhere in this series. So where we last left off on the pilot episode, Louis was bitten by Lestat and has become a vampire, and that's where we pick up. And I want to say that there will be a minor spoiler in this review, because there's a spoiler that I want to talk about that triggered my wife, and she never gets triggered. Anyway, back to the review. So, Louis is now a vampire, so this episode 2, is about his adjustment as a vampire and trying to get used to who his maker is. And so that is the plot for episode 2. And I'm going to quit saying that it's or compare it to the book, because it's clearly made known by this second episode that they're doing their own thing and that they're no longer going to try to follow the book. They'll throw in lines from the novel and certain things that are similar to the novel, but like I've said in my original review, that Interview the Vampire, the AMC series, is almost like an alternate timeline kind of thing, because nothing in this episode happened in the novel. All right, so with that said, though, so Louis is now a vampire, and what I was happy to see is the painful change into vampire. So if you have seen the pilot, you saw at the end when Louis became a vampire by drinking Lestat's blood, he just seemed to drink it and his eyes changed a different color. And I was thinking to myself, wow, that was really easy to be a vampire. If being a vampire and becoming a vampire was that easy, then you would think there'd be more vampires in the world. But we see on episode 2 that the dying of the body starts to happen, that Louis still has to die after drinking Lestat's blood to become a vampire. So I was happy to see that they didn't make the transition so easy, because that's one thing I didn't like about the change and how they change, is that it's just to drink a vampire's blood and your eyes change and apparently you're a vampire. But no, they still went the traditional Anne Rice route, and it makes your body die and then you're reborn as a vampire. And with that said, they did have a nod to the film, which is in the novel, how that whenever you become a vampire, you see with vampire eyes, and they even had Louis looking at a statue. It didn't open its eyes and blink like it does in the film, but it was almost like everything is in rainbow color. So they did acknowledge that vampires see the world in a different light than just an average person does. So what this episode really establishes and sets it apart from the novel and the film is the take of Louis, how he is still the sad, moping vampire he is in the novel, but he's not the vampire equivalent of a vegan or vegetarian like he is in the novel and film, where he refuses to eat humans. In this series, he is more a reluctant vampire, to where he is disgusted by having to drink blood during his early vampire days. So he will still drink blood and not just eat rats. You know, that was the big thing about the film, is that you only eat rats, Louis. All I gotta do is find the trail of rats, you know. So he still eats human, but he's more of disgusted about it afterwards. Like, he drunk a certain person in this episode, and he was fine with drinking it, but it was I guess it's a guilt, because he saw the dead body laying there, and you could just tell he was just disgusted at what he had to do. So with that said, what makes him disgusted, you can see the signs of him being disgusted with his maker Lestat. It's not that he eats human more than it is how he treats his victims before the kill. And that is what brings the fight in between the two, is that Louis has more a passion, or compassion I should say, for the victim than Lestat does. And the big scene that I really enjoyed in this episode, that's kind of off character in a way, but then again, you got to remember that Lestat was the villain in the original novel. But the big scene to me is that Lestat takes Louis to the opera. And they have their private box, and they're sitting there in the private box watching the opera. And Lestat, what's cute is that he is so in love with music, is that he's sitting there, he has the sheet music, and he's reading along with the opera. So that was cute. I did like that. But the evilness or meanness of Lestat, what happens, here's a spoiler, is that they're watching the opera, and the main tenor lead of the opera is all over the place with the notes. And Lestat, a music lover, is so upset and angry, he's going to do something about that guy, just because the guy is ruining the opera. And so I won't say what happens, but the way it's handled discuss Louis and things like that are what turn Louis off, and see that maybe Lestat is not the perfect savior from his boring world, or whatever escape Louis wanted. That maybe there could be something wrong with his maker. Or again, I watched this with my wife, and that just made a big deal to me. So, speaking of my wife, here comes the trigger. So there is a little spoiler here. Again, not a huge spoiler, but something that triggered my wife. So it was something so bad, she had to pause it and almost walked out of the room. So, episode 2. So what was the big scene that really stopped her cold? So Louis goes to visit his sister, and when he becomes a vampire, he's having to wear glasses, almost his sunglasses, to cover his eyes, because now his eyes are like green, like avocado green. And so he finds out, and he can tell and hear heartbeats now, and he sees his sister, and he knows his sister is pregnant with twins. So the sister has twins, and he goes to visit his sister and see her baby. I'm surprised really that this wasn't a warning at the beginning, because every episode they always like to warn you that this is going to happen and this might upset you, kind of thing, because this just kind of came out of nowhere, even though it was in the teaser. So what happens is that he is left alone as a vampire with his baby nephew Benjamin, which I think is another nod to the Anne Rice series, because as we know who've read the novels, that Benjamin is a vampire later in the series. So he is holding the baby, and this is what upset my wife, is that it made Louis hungry. He was sitting there looking at the baby, and it's like is he going to eat this baby? I mean, he gets so hungry that his teeth come out and all that stuff. And my wife literally had to stop it and pause it. And I'm like, come on. I said, we got to watch this. And she's like, oh, I don't know. I can't do this. And she's someone that usually thinks that people who get upset about TV shows don't realize it's just a show. So I had to remind her, I'm like, it's just a show. Come on, let's go. Go. Because I was wanting to see what happened. I was wanting to see, are they really going to go there? Are they going to kill a newborn baby? Is Louis going to be the villain? Is this going to be his dark side? And so I was like, she was like, okay. And she hit it again. And we watched, and you find out what happens. But I think it's leading up to Claudia, that maybe if he doesn't kill this baby, that temptation is still there. And so it's a hint to maybe he can't hold back. As we know, he can't hold back whenever he has Claudia later. So it was interesting that was a really big trigger. I've never seen my wife ever stop something and almost walk out of the room, but that got her. So that, if that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know, but that got her. So another thing that they've done on this series to make Louis more human, to keep more to his human side, is that he actually eats food still, even up to the modern day. Is that every now and then he said he likes to partake of human food just to keep that connection to being human, which is an interesting take of on the vampire. And he says that, but like ice cream, they have some kind of ice cream dish, and he says it just tastes like chalk. It's just very bland and boring, but he does it to keep to his human side, which was, again, an interesting take on the vampire. That doesn't necessarily contradict. It never happens in the novels, but I mean, wasn't so big of an offense that I thought that was like completely sacrilegious to the series, but it was interesting. That was an interesting take to keep Louis human. So overall, an interesting episode. It had a lot of neat ideas that were introduced to this world. Again, I'm going to quit comparing it to the novel because this second episode 100% established that this is its own thing. They're going to do their own thing, and we are just along for the ride and see where it's going to go from here. And like I said, my favorite scene, I think, of this episode was the opera scene, that Lestat was so in love with music that he was reading along, smiling and reading the sheet music. That was cute. And then he was making changes to the opera, and that whole scene was just great, even though it really painted him as a villain, that he would kill someone just for hitting all the bad notes. I know that a lot of us, we hear people sing and we're like that. I mean, we've all been there. Have we thought about killing people for hitting those wrong notes, though? And for triggering my wife, I was like, whoa, that's a pretty powerful scene. I don't know. But it kept me going.